If you're administering a network, then certainly you are also administering the printers that are connected on that network that people are using to output their information, and almost always if you're administering a network, then certainly you are also administering the printers that are connected on that network that people are using to output their information. And almost always this is done across the network. To be able to administer these printers, you need to then access the print management capabilities of the operating system. If you're in Windows XP, you can find this in the control panel under printers and faxes. And in Windows 7 and Windows Vista, it's located in the control panel under administrative tools, and then you'll find print management. This is a great place to centralize all of your print management because you can connect to every single printer on your network and get a status and update of all of your printers from this one central console. It makes it a perfect place to go to see everything all with one glance. This also makes a very nice central place to be able to manage all of your print drivers. If you've ever worked with printers, especially a large number of different kinds of printers on a network, you know that finding the right driver for the printer can often be a challenge, and you don't want to leave it to your end users to have to go out to a manufacturer's website, find the proper driver for them, make sure they download and install the proper driver. Instead, you can have these drivers ready and waiting for them so that when they connect to a printer that's now on the network, they'll have the drivers immediately downloaded and available to their computer. And it doesn't matter whether they're running a 32-bit operating system or a 64-bit version of an operating system, you have already preloaded the drivers for both of those. And this makes it very easy for your end users. They can bring in a brand new computer. They can simply browse the network, point to a particular printer, and the drivers will automatically download, and they can start using that printer immediately. I'm in Windows 7, so we'll find our print management in the control panel. I'll choose administrative tools, and you'll see there's a printer right there with a little wrench for print management. The print management utility is a preloaded version of the Microsoft Management Console type layout where you have all of your options on the left column, the selection of what you're currently looking at in the middle, and your actions are on the right side. You can see print management's right here at the top, and I have a list of some custom filters that are built in here. You can see all printers, all drivers, printers not ready, and printers with jobs are listed. These are the default filters. That way, if you have 100 different printers on your network, you can add them and see them in different ways. If you just wanted to immediately find all the printers that were not ready, you can go to one view and click it, and you can see all of the printers on your network that might be having problems. There are also print servers listed, so you can see exactly where your different print servers might be, and deployed printers is also listed. And this gives you different views and different ways to see what's happening with printers in your environment. If I look at all of the printers, you can see every single printer that may be defined. You can also see all of the drivers that you currently have configured for all of your systems, and you can see exactly what type of environments that you've configured this for. In my environment, I have a Brother MFC 845CW, and I've only installed drivers for a 32-bit operating system. If I knew that there was a 64-bit operating system that I would need to provide this driver for, then I can load them right into this view, and they'll be available when that person connects to the printer. You'll notice on my network that I do have a printer that is not ready. It tells me that it's the Brother MFC 845CW. It tells me that I am low on toner and ink. So this printer is still working, but now I'm getting feedback from this print management view that tells me this might be a problem. You might want to change out the printer ink. You might want to order some new printer ink if you don't have any, because eventually you're going to run out of this particular ink and someone's going to call and say that their printer isn't working. This gives you a way to be a little bit more proactive. If we right mouse click on any of the printers, we'll see a lot of different options available for us. You can do everything from opening the printer queue so that you can manage the print jobs that are inside of that printer. You can pause the printing on this, or you can look at all of the properties for this printer. You can see there are a lot of different options here, and you've got different sharing options. You can see what ports are configured. You can even see in this case the exact IP address that I'm using to communicate to this printer. You've got some advanced options for this particular printer, some color management capabilities since this is a color printer, the security of who may have access to print to this printer. You can also change who might be able to manage the printer, manage manage documents and even set special permissions for this printer and the device settings themselves, which of course will be specific to every individual printer. By using this centralized print management view, you can see everything at a glance, and it really makes it easy for managing a lot of different printers that may be located anywhere in your environment. When you're installing a printer for the very first time, you not only need the hardware printer itself, but you also need the appropriate drivers to use for the operating system so that it can talk properly to that printer. You need to make sure that the printer drivers that you're getting are exactly the ones you should have for the operating system you're using, in some cases, even specific versions of the operating system. For example, a Windows XP driver is different than a Windows 7 driver. So make sure you know what version of the operating system you're using and use the appropriate printer driver for that version. You also have to make sure you pick exactly the right driver for the printer that you're installing. That's because the printer driver has a lot of very important information in there. It defines what type of language the printer is using. Maybe it's using PCL, maybe it's using PostScript, maybe it's using something different. The printer driver determines how your computer will talk to that printer. It also knows the type of paper trays that are expected on that printer type. If there are different colors that printer can support, perhaps any fonts that might already be enabled inside of the printer, that would certainly enhance any printouts that you're doing, and anything else that the printer uses to be able to finally give you an output from that printing device. Here's a good example of why choosing the exact printer driver is so important. Let's look at these two printers. This is one that is an Epson Action Laser 1000. This other one, also a LaserJet, an HP LaserJet 8150. These are two different printers made by two different manufacturers. And if we look at the Epson Action Laser, we can see there is an upper paper tray, there is a manual paper feed tray, there is a lower paper tray, and some font cartridge options which have nothing installed in them. Notice the differences on the HP side. The Hewlett-Packard printer has many different paper trays associated with it. There's even an envelope feeder along with the manual feed tray. So when you send, for instance, information to print out on a letter and you send that to the Epson Action Laser, you have the choice of an upper, a manual, and a lower. When you send that to an HP LaserJet 8150, you can choose from all of these other options. And the only way those options would be available to you on the screen is if you had installed the proper printer driver. If you're connecting to a wired printer, you may see a number of different interfaces being used. If you are using point-of-sale type printers, you may see something like a serial port being used. We don't commonly see serial ports being used on our desktop computers or our laptop computers. It's something that is very specific to point-of-sale. On our desktop systems, commonly in the past, we have used something like a parallel connection with this Centronics connector on the back of the printer, and usually there is a parallel 25-pin connection that is plugging into the computer. These days, it's more of a legacy connection. They're very big 25-pin connectors, and usually you don't see those on laptop computers where the amount of real estate on that particular device is at such a premium. Commonly these days, we're seeing something like USB. USB is turned into this very common interface that we would use for almost everything. We use it for our keyboards. We use it for a mouse. We can also, of course, use it for printers as well. And if you're plugging in a modern wired printer to your computer, it's probably going to use USB. Another way to connect a printer using a wire is to plug in an Ethernet connection. You can get something like a print server like this one that has an Ethernet connection on one end, so you can plug into the network and have everyone access the printer that you then plug in onto this USB connection. So this allows you to connect the computer as you normally would through a USB, but instead of plugging that USB connection into your computer, you're plugging it into this print server that everyone on the network would have access to. Just as there are many interfaces used for printing on a wired computer, there's also many ways to print wirelessly. One legacy method of wireless printing is infrared. This is commonly seen as IRDA, which stands for the Infrared Data Association. This used a line of sight between your mobile device or your computer to the printer itself. And although it was used for a short period of time, the infrared had too many limitations associated with it, drivers that had to be loaded, printers that needed to support it, and eventually it was a technology that was phased out. If you have a mobile device that can communicate via Bluetooth, you might want to look at connecting to a Bluetooth-enabled printer. A Bluetooth printer is using this personal area network. It's not a huge network. Once you get a number of yards away, the network is not accessible any longer. Those two devices can't communicate to each other. But generally, when you're printing to a printer that might be in your office, it's in a relatively short distance from you. That way, you don't have to have any wires going to the printer. You can be relatively mobile, and the speed and connectivity to the printer is somewhere between 1 to 3 megabits per second. So you still get very good throughput even though you're using a wireless network. But perhaps the most common wireless printing technology available today is 802.11. That is the standard that we tend to use for everything, for our mobile devices, for our laptop machines, and also for our printers. Our printers might have an antenna right on the side of them that's able to communicate via standard 802.11a, b, g, or n. And that way we're able to use standards that we already have in our laptops and our desktops to be able to naturally communicate directly to the printer without having any type of wire or any type of print server in between. If you have installed a printer and you've connected it to your computer, you still have the option in Microsoft Windows to share that printer with everybody else who might be on the network. That way you can connect your printer to your device, but anybody else in the office would be able to print to that printer. In Windows XP, you would do this through the control panel. You would choose printers and faxes. You would right-click the printer, choose the properties for the printer, and inside of that will be a sharing tab that you can enable the sharing capabilities for that printer. Here's our Windows XP desktop. To find that particular setting, you can go either to the control panel and then go to all of your printers and faxes, or you can simply start at the start menu and choose printers and faxes and go to the same place. If I right mouse click the printer, you will see the properties option at the very bottom, and inside that properties option is the sharing tab. And this is what allows you to share that printer. You can give that printer a name, and then everyone on the network would be able to see that printer and be able to use it just by browsing through it on the network and connecting to it through a network link. In Windows 7, it's a similar configuration, almost in the same exact place. It's under Control Panel, Devices and Printers. You would right-click the printer and choose Printer Properties, and that's where you will find the Sharing tab. Let's see how this looks. We'll start at the Start menu. There is a control panel. Notice Devices and Printers is also in that Start menu, but to show you everything, we'll go into the control panel under Devices and Printers, one extra step. Under Devices and Printers, you'll see everything, including all of the printers that you have installed. This is where we take a little bit of a deviation from the Windows XP config. If we right mouse click the printer, the option that will be available to you is Printer Properties. If you go all the way down to Properties, you will not get a sharing tab. Instead, you will right mouse click and choose Printer Properties, and inside of the Printer Properties will be that sharing tab, and it looks almost identical to the sharing tab you have in Windows XP. It's very common in large environments for many different kinds of operating systems to need access to different resources. And one of the things that can make things a little bit easier for everyone else in the office is that if you load the printer drivers for your printer right onto your computer for all of those different operating systems. That way, when a 64-bit operating system connects, they'll be able to download the drivers directly from your computer rather than having to go out to a Windows site or the manufacturer's site to find out where those drivers might be. If you're troubleshooting a printer, one of the first things you'll commonly do is to print a test page. You can do this directly from your printer configurations. If you go into the properties of your printer on the General tab, you will have Print Test Page right at the bottom. This allows you to use the Windows printing process outside of an application to print directly to the printer, so you can understand a little bit better exactly what's happening with the Windows printing process. There may also be generic printing tools available to help you. There's a number of live CDs available that help you with troubleshooting printers. Sometimes your vendor of the printer will have a third-party application available that can print to that printer, and sometimes the printer itself might have a utility inside of it that you can use to print without having any computer connected at all. Your printer test page looks something like this. You've got a little bit of color, there's some text on the screen, and you can at least get a feel for how the printer output might look when you don't have any other type of application input. If this output looks okay, then you can focus your troubleshooting efforts on how the application is using the printer. But if this happens to have some discoloration, if some of the text doesn't look quite right, you can then concentrate on the printing process between Windows and the printer itself. If you create some output on the printer and you're seeing streaks or blurring on the printer, there's a few things you can check. If you're working with an inkjet printer, you might want to check the print head, since they are really responsible for putting all of the ink directly on the paper. If this is a laser printer, you might want to see if the photosensitive drum that's inside the printer happens to be scratched. And if it is, you can have lines that extend all the way through that printout. If the printout itself is looking a little faded or some parts of it are difficult to read, you may want to check to see how much toner might be inside of your laser printer. Your inkjet printer may be running a little low on ink, and that might cause some fading as well. Laser printers might also suffer through a problem with ghost images. That's when your image on your page may repeat itself slightly as you're going down the page. With these drums that are revolving a number of times through the print process, if they're not cleaned properly, you end up having that toner revolve back through around and move back onto the page. This is usually a problem with the cleaning process inside of your laser printer, so you may need to perform maintenance to either repair or replace that process. Sometimes you'll print out some information to the printer and it's just garbage. It's a bunch of noise and nonsense on the page. You'll want to check to see what kind of printer driver you're using. If you're printing to a laser printer for PostScript and you're sending it PCL, then it's absolutely not going to look the way that it should. The application itself may be the thing that's sending the bad text to the printer itself, and you may want to check with a test page just to make sure that there's no problems with the printer itself. If we grab some output off of the laser printer and we notice that it smudges on our fingers, it's not attached to the page and it smudges everywhere, then there's probably an issue with the toner being fused properly to the page. Just before that paper comes out of the printer, we have heat and pressure that is applied that melts that toner directly on the page permanently. It should not be smudging once it comes out of the printer. You may notice that when the paper comes out of the printer, it's not as hot as it should be. That fusing process makes the paper very warm. And if it's not warm, then there's probably an issue with the fuser and it will have to be replaced to solve this problem. If you're creating a color output and you notice the colors are off a bit, maybe one particular color is a lot stronger than the others on the page, but everything else looks okay, then you probably just have one of the colors that is getting a bit low. If you looked at your inkjet printer, you'll notice that there are different color cartridges. If you happen to get low on one particular color, the other colors will be much stronger. So you may want to check and make sure that those have exactly the amount of ink, and simply replacing the ink cartridge will usually solve that problem. If paper gets stuck inside of the printer, you want to be very careful about removing that paper jam. You don't want to rip the paper and have some little tiny pieces of paper stuck deep inside of the printer, and you want to be careful that you don't damage any of those very, very delicate components inside of the printer. If paper isn't being pulled into the printer at all, it's probably an issue with the rollers. They're responsible for grabbing that paper and pulling it all the way through the printer. It's very common for those to wear out, and that's why you usually see rollers included for replacements whenever you get a laser printer maintenance kit. A piece of creased paper can also cause a paper jam, so you want to make sure all of the paper going into your printer is as flat as possible. And you also want to check the weight of the paper. Certain types of weights will cause problems going through certain printers. So make sure you check your printer documentation to see exactly what weight of paper is appropriate for your printer. These days, our printers aren't connecting to our computer. We're simply plugging them into the network or connecting them to the wireless network. And if they're not connecting at all, we don't see any status from the printer, then we've probably lost connectivity to it. We should certainly check to see if the printer is powered on. It's obviously not going to work properly, and we're not going to be able to see it over the network if it doesn't have power. We might also want to check the front panel of the printer and make sure there are no messages or things that are waiting for a user intervention. And then we might want to check the networking settings. Make sure that we have a good cable connection on a wired connection. Make sure that our wireless connection is correct. That way we can be assured that that printer can communicate with the other devices that are on the network. Of course, we can also limit access to the printer through the operating system. If somebody is seeing an access denied, we may want to check to see how this computer security settings are set. We can see, for instance, in this printer that we've allowed certain permissions for certain people. So you can allow people to print or not print to a printer. You might want to assign some people to be able to manage the printer and other people to manage documents on the printer. Most printers are going to have a display on the front like this one that's going to be able to tell us messages and give us error displays of what might be going on. The printers these days have very large LCD displays where we can get a lot of information about the status of what's happening on that printer. It's on these displays where we might get messages about there being not enough memory inside of a printer or running low on memory when it's trying to print. The entire page of a laser printer is being built in memory, all of the graphics, all of the text. And when the printer is finally ready to print the entire page, does it finally begin the printing process? A laser printer can't print half the page and stop and then print the other half. It has to print the entire page at one time. And if it's a very complex page with a lot of graphics and a lot of text, then it might take up a lot of memory inside of a laser printer. And if it can't handle this very complex diagram or display that it's trying to print out, it may send an out of memory message and print only as much as it can. So you may get a piece of output that shows half of the information we sent it, and it just wasn't able to build that much information in memory. If somebody's trying to print to a printer for the very first time, your Windows may need to install the drivers for that particular printer. And installing drivers may be something that the user may or may not have rights to be able to do. Drivers are an important operating system update, and we want to be sure that if somebody's installing a driver that they're really doing it for the right reasons. You can configure certain printer drivers to install and then prevent other types of drivers, so you may want to check with the administrator of these systems to make sure they're set up to be able to install those. And of course, you have to have the correct printer driver. You have to make sure you're using the printer driver for the right printer and that you've got one for the right operating system you're using, whether you're using a 32-bit operating system or a 64-bit operating system, because those printer drivers are very different. If there are a lot of print jobs being sent to the printer and nothing is printing out, you notice the queue is getting bigger and bigger, then you might have a problem with the service that's providing the spooling process to that printer. You might want to restart the spooling process, or maybe look at the print spooler service and see what type of failure settings are there. If a print server fails, you could have it restart the service. Maybe on the first failure restart, maybe the second failure restart, maybe subsequent failures we set other settings, especially if we're running into a situation where the spooler is failing often. That way we can have this automatically restart without any type of user intervention, and all of these printouts can print successfully.